So sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues, as you can imagine. So let's get started. I'll see whether I can finish a little earlier by speaking a little faster. So thanks for coming. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll talk to you about how we can build the foundation of HR analytics. And this is really a way that it's kind of like my personal reflections on how you can build the foundation for HR analytics based on my experience at my current company and previous employments. So this is by no means the way that you have to build HR analytics. Of course, there are other ways of doing this. So my name is Peter Hartmann. I am working at a Swedish medtech company called Getinge, where I'm responsible for HR analytics and business intelligence. And for those of you who are not familiar with Getinge, then we are a Swedish medtech company of around 11,000 FTE globally. And we are specialized within operating tables, operating rooms, ventilators, ECMOs, washers, and sterilizers. But before I kind of come with my reflections on the journey of HR analytics, I want to talk to you about you can say the nature of HR analytics. So what are we actually talking about here? And you can't really talk about HR analytics without actually putting HR on the spot as well. And what is the value of HR? And for those of you who attended yesterday, I think Shell had a similar slide on this one, because what we know about HR is that companies that are able to ensure the correct skill set, the right motivation of their people, and giving these people to the opportunity to perform, they seem to be outperforming their counterparts. So the research suggests that the variation in organization and financial performance across companies can be explained by around 25% of the company's ability to ensure proper skills, motivation, and the opportunity to perform. And then HR analytics, in my mind, is a method of ensuring that we are kind of working dedicatedly and effectively on those pillars. Because HR analytics, in my mind, is really not a new trend in any way. I kind of think that the principles and the method have been around for more than 20 years, because some of the principles that were applied in strategical human resource management was already back then that we wanted to link HR to the strategy, and we wanted to be able to show that HR actually mattered, and we want to put on KPIs. So a way to define HR analytics is that it's the practical applications of metrics, statistics, methodology, and existing research to provide valid information for better decision making. So what we're really trying to do here is to generate a lot of insights that can be used, and we use research methodology to do this. However, an even more important aspect of this is that it needs to be insights that you can actually act on and use in real life. So you rather want to compromise on the quality of the insights if it's something that can be translated into actions. HR analytics also kind of spans from more generic questions that you can actually just answer by looking at textbooks and generic research to those more company-specific questions on specific business challenges that really require data from the company. So my reflections on the journey of analytics, kind of a classical stepwise approach here, is that when we talk about embarking on the journey of HR analytics, I think there are some prerequisites that needs to be in place in order to get started, or at least in order to be somewhat successful during the journey. I think step number one is that you need to ensure to have one or more sponsors and senior stakeholders involved in the project, because there's a lot of hype about HR analytics. So sometimes you're being tasked just to do some HR analytics, and we want to build a function, but we don't really know what we want to do. And we might say that we are data driven, but that's not necessarily what we are. So it's important that these stakeholders actually start working with the data, perhaps even before they have the data, that they try help you kind of build this organizational mindset in the organization. Because in my mind, the HR analytics is more of a kind of a series of skill sets and competencies throughout the organization that helps you become data driven than actually a function. I mean, you need the function to help drive this and get started, but you will not succeed on HR analytics if you don't also change the culture in the organization. And if you're working in a culture that is very, very gut driven, then bringing more data or better data does not necessarily actually change how people feel about using the data. So it's a change management process as much as it's you can say data crunching and coming up with ideas. And a low practical way of approaching this, at least in my experience, has been that with some of the data-driven approach that we try to visualize and try to convince the business partners that it's actually a good way to use data, that if they use the data, they can actually do their job better, faster, easier, so that there's bang for the buck. So it's really down to also displaying the value of the HR analytics that you have, so that people can see that it actually is meaningful to do. You will always have to, or also have to you can say manage the expectations or discuss the expectations, because the expectations of HR analytics and the impressions of HR analytics kind of varies from people having no idea what it is and why we're doing this, to having some people that are basically just asking you to provide some insights that are interesting for them without any kind of context of what that could be. Or you have people that kind of think that the HR analytics is the holy grail, and they'll provide you kind of quick fixes and clear answers to everything. However, the reality of analytics is more that we are trying to kind of piece together a puzzle. We're testing some hypotheses. We're giving an estimate, and we're kind of setting up likelihood scenarios and basically connecting the dots between information, and that will also take a long time to do. Then, of course, the ambition level is something that you also need to take into consideration. Because if you're going to start, I mean, if you have a high ambition level, of course, you need to have more resources. I mean, this slide by Burson and Deloitte, you can argue whether that's fully up to date and fully relevant, but that's kind of beyond the point. The idea here is that, of course, the more ambitious you are, the more resources and more time it will actually take to do. And with high ambition level, you also need more competencies in the team. I listed kind of 6 key competencies that I think are the most relevant ones. You can argue whether that should be more or whether it should be less, but I think it boils down to that you have these kind of skill sets in the team. One of them being that you need to have good stakeholder management, so the ability to engage HR, to do the change management, to get that organizational buy-in, and sometimes navigate the company politics. You should have a good business understanding as well, so that the analytics that you're doing is something that is relevant for HR and for the business. And when it then comes to kind of either conducting a specific study or fetching data from your HR system, then you need to have people that have competence within the HR IS system, whether they're actually owning it or whether they're just expert on it, and the same kind of the expertise on the governance. So let's assume that you get the data from the system, then you have it there. If not, then you might actually need to collect the data. Anyway, whether you collect it or kind of snatch it from your HR IT system, you need to have people that can actually transform that data and crunch that data into something that is somewhat meaningful. But if you want to kind of take a step away from just kind of like statistical data crunching into assigning a meaning to it, so from an organizational psychology perspective, then you need to have subject matter experts that can help guide you on the specific topic at hand, whether that's engagement or health and safety or whatever you're working with. And then last but not least, when you figured out what the data kind of suggest, then you need to communicate this in a short and compelling way. The likelihood that you're actually going to get 6 FTE or more to drive your HR analytics function in the beginning is very, very unlikely. So you might need to actually start getting resources from somewhere else and work in a slightly different way. And some of the approaches that I at least have had is that I start with approaching other people within HR, for instance, the Center of Excellence, to get that subject matter expertise. That can also be outside HR if it's, for instance, health and safety. I've been working a lot with the business partners because they are really a valuable source to what is relevant, both for them, but what is relevant for the business. So you kind of get that business understanding and business acumen from some of your business partners. when working with the communication, and there you can kind of get their help to help kind of building a compelling story and narrative around the results that you have found. And if you sometimes are looking for people that can help crunch your data, then some of the other functions that is in the company is also available elsewhere. They might not know HR data, but they might be able to help you set up specific models and test different stuff. That could be finance, operation, health, and safety. And if you can't find the resources within the company, then of course there's an option for you to try to get some outside side help. There are both universities offering help, or you have companies that are kind of specialized in providing help for you in doing HR analytics. Some that only do parts of it, or other that actually do basically the entire process for you for a specific project. So now that you're ready to kind of get started on your journey, you have your resources, you have your mandate, then kind of the HR system is often a valuable source of information. And in order to kind of set that up besides the IT skills, then you often run into kind of a conflicting agenda on what is needed from a kind of global reporting and analytics perspective, all the KPIs and studies you wanna do with the HR data and link it to different stuff, compared to what's actually possible to collect in the high degree of need for granularity of data, whereas in the local HR, they will often kind of focus on what is relevant from a kind of execution of contract. And in my experience, it's always a good place to start with all the data that they collect locally on a relatively uniform way of doing it, and get started with classical turnover and FTE. Probably not that super interesting always, but it's a very good place to know that the data is there. And that kind of gives you can say, the license to operate and start asking for more data, and say that, well, if we really want to know a little more about our employees, then perhaps we need to set up some extra data points that we are collecting. But you can argue that, well, you're really up against the operational efficiency of the local HR. So whatever you then bring in the form of HR analytics projects, whether that's KPI or advanced analytics, is sometimes paid out of the operational efficiency, and you need to keep that in back of your head. Then just getting data into the system is not always just that. Well, sometimes it's easy, but I think the key part here is that you need to make sure that it's also consistent, and that you agree on what goes into the system and how to interpret that. So I think it's important that you, as part of this project, you might be responsible for it, and if not, then you need to work with the people that there should be good, proper governance and training on how to use the system, because we're really trying to take a real-life event and translate that into a system language. We code it, we then store it, retrieve it, and then we start to use and interpret this data, either on an individual level, if it's a business partner talking about promotion, or we do it on an aggregated level when we're doing HR analytics. In any case, it's something that we need to align on how we actually transform the data, so we really are storing information and getting information out of it. And that kind of ties into the entire principle of data quality, because if you don't have any good data quality, then it's difficult to actually say anything meaningful. And here, in order to drive data quality, you really need to make sure that you have the good governance, because you can't really talk about quality if you haven't established how you're supposed to use the system and how the data goes in there. And one of the key things with the governance, of course, is that it needs to be relatively simple for people to actually apply, and for the data quality, that it's something that you can follow up on. In my mind, this is really an iterative process, that you start out with the governance, you start driving the quality, and then once your data has you can say, sufficient level of quality, basically meaning that it's more correct than it's incorrect, then you should start using the data. Initially, kind of do report on it, feed it back to HR and to the business, whoever wants to use it and hear it. Because the idea is that once you start using the data, and give it a little attention, then people will notice that there's actually either that the quality is bad, or that they're actually using the data, and then people will start asking questions, and that again will drive the data quality. And as part of this, then the way that I have been working on using the data has been kind of down two lines. One thing, of course, is first to create the accountability, so to make sure that people actually know who they're responsible for. But the way it is basically displaying the data in reports and not massaging the numbers in any way. So if we find something that is just completely wrong in the system, then we don't go in and change it, because that's what the data says in the system, and whatever is in system, you can argue that will be the historical truth. We would then present the data, then flag if we saw something that we think looks really weird, but it will still actually be there for people to then look at it and act on it, and then hopefully think that, well, it's not good enough that the data is so poor, so we can't really use it. To make sure that those that own the data and use the data also take some accountability for it. And the data, as mentioned, doesn't have to be perfect to add value. It just has to be better than guessing. And the more it's used, the higher the quality. Another important thing is to try to create these links in across the different systems that you might have. So try to link it to your Active Directory, your travel profile, financial reporting, payroll, training, whatever you have where you can use the HR data. Then try to create a linkage there, because that's not just going to drive the data quality in the HR system, it will also drive the data quality in the other system. And if you're lucky, then it's also going to optimize some of the processes that you have by simply reduce dual maintenance. So once you have perfect data, super good quality, everything is up and running, then you can start working more, you can say, professionally on your KPIs and metrics. And some of the principles that we apply when we are looking at metrics is first and foremost, try to align the metrics with the strategy and the business challenges. So focus on those metrics that are really interesting and adding value, and where you have a good assumption that people are actually going to act on the specific KPIs. So having KPIs that is not really answering any questions in the organization, or where people are never really using them, that doesn't really add a lot of value for anybody, right? So the alignment with the business challenges, going back to the strategic human resource management principles that we had. Try to simplify some of the calculations that you have, and simplify the amount of KPIs. You can kind of use a good starting point if you're just getting started, is to kind of use some of those evergreens on FTE and turnover and whatever is relatively easy to get, because some of those might be relatively boring, but in my experience is that 90% of the questions relating to descriptive analytics is actually answered very well with a couple of few KPIs that everybody tends to look for, because they are easy to interpret, easy to get, and they actually give kind of like a good temperature on the organization. And one of the reasons why you also want to simplify both the amount and the complexity of the calculation is that then it's easier to standardize the way that you're doing it across different regions and business units. Of course, when you try to standardize across regions and business units, then you often run into the issue of saying that, well, we can't really compare absenteeism in Germany versus absenteeism in the US, because there's a different labor law. And of course, you're correct on that one. But the idea is that if you align, simplify, and standardize, you kind of create a business relevant yardstick that you can then apply, and you can look at that historically. And the way that you then interpret that yardstick is then something that is discussed within the business unit or within the specific region. So you can say the scale of yard, or the metric system, or Celsius on Fahrenheit, that is something that we keep the same way, but the interpretation can then differ, and the specific targets can differ, and they in most cases actually should differ. Because the beauty of this is that once you standardize and simplify these things, then it's much more easier for you to then automate these specific metrics, and then enable a higher degree of self-service, and you can display this in a user-friendly format. Because that's, let's be honest, we don't have a lot of people that are sitting and waiting each month to kind of look at the data and then going in and looking at them for kind of on a daily basis, because it's obviously not that interesting. A lot of HR data is relatively slow-moving data, so you don't really need to get an update on a daily basis. But where the HR data can add a lot of value is that if you have good HR data available when you need it, so when you're sitting and doing the organizational reassignment, if you suddenly need to do an upscaling or a downsizing, or if you're sitting and negotiating specific contract that includes the kind of the amount of FTE for a specific factory or drilling rig or whatever you're working with, then having access to that data can actually be very, very powerful. So it's really about that you make good HR data available when people need it, and not when you have time to actually sit and crunch it. Last but not least, the advanced analytics. I guess the sexy part of the analytics. Some of the principles that I've been working with on kind of the approach to HR, advanced HR analytics, have been that first and foremost, try to identify the business challenges. So what's in it for the business if we start looking at this project? What's kind of paying the bill on this one? Does it affect the top line, bottom line, reduce risk? You might not always be able to fully kind of answer that question kind of in dollar terms, but at least give it a try to see, well, why are we actually doing this? Ensure the stakeholder commitment. So make sure that you involve the people that have kind of requested this, but also other people that might be affected by this, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you created a study, you found some interesting result, and then people don't really want to listen because they didn't feel that they were involved, or that they're simply not willing to actually change any of the processes. So you need to kind of like justify your that you're spending money on this. So once you have all the you have the business challenge, you have the commitment, then you start building your model. And a good place to start is always to look at, well, what do we already know from internal expert and from external scientific research? Then you either collect the data internally, could be that you're getting it from your different kind of IT systems, or it could be that you need to go out and actually collect data in a survey or experimental design, or however you want to get the data. You analyze them, you interpret them, working with kind of the internal experts, and then you kind of put different actions or recommended actions into place. Sometimes those can be kind of sophisticated, something that you can go in and actually work on from a process perspective. Other times you might conclude that, well, you actually need more data in order to conclude anything. And then the recommendation is that we redo the study. So some of the stuff that we've been working on at Getinge, just to give you a couple of examples of what HR analytics could be, then some of these, I mean, they are totally not rocket science in any way. It's basically just reproducing some stuff that we already know from research. And why? Because it's a way of kind of displaying and showcasing HR analytics, what it can be used for. And it's often much more powerful to try to come across with a message that you have from the scientific literature if you actually use company data. So we looked at the voluntary turnover versus the engagement, and to no surprise, people that hate us, they have a tendency to leave us, and people that love us, they tend to stay. So nothing super exciting about that one, but kind of a good way of showcasing the importance of driving engagement and how data can be used to back this up. We also looked at kind of the assumption hypothesis that if you take care of your employees, they will take care of your customers, and then that will also drive the sale growth. So what we saw here is that there was a good relationship between our employee engagement and the way that they approached the customer, of how happy the customers were, and our sales growth. And then I guess not surprisingly, if there was a high growth of gross national product, then a lot of people were actually kind of happy just based on that. Then we also looked at kind of the idea of driving engagement, because obviously we know engagement is relevant. So how do we motivate our managers to actually go in and start working with engagement? And there we use some of our data on year to year to say that, well, we can see that managers that do not seem to take any actions on improving their engagement, they will stay at the same level. In this case, we only looked at the kind of low engagers, so that, well, they are actually not seeming to improve. Whereas if we then started looking at managers that were perceived to have taken action, then they were had a higher likelihood of actually improving and increase their engagement. So the story was basically that, well, if you, you can do something about engaging your team, but you have to put in an effort. If you don't put in an effort, then don't expect anything to change. Then we also wanted to look at to the extent that engagement kind of dribbles through the organization. So address what some managers will say that, well, because my manager is not really engaging me or anybody, then I cannot be fully engaged. So we looked at kind of the effect from manager to manager or team to team. And what we, in this case, found was that we saw that there was a strong relationship between kind of trust in upper management, understanding and buying to the company strategy across the levels, meaning that if we were not good enough at the top level to actually explain what we were doing and why we were doing, then we saw that information getting diluted down the organization, and then we would have kind of a poor commitment. Whereas when we looked at the kind of more individual or team-based relationship between the manager and the employee, then a manager will pick up some good habits or bad habits from the manager, but the correlation would be relatively weak, kind of indicating that even if your manager is not building a good relationship with you, that doesn't mean that you can build a good relationship with your own employees. One of the other studies that we've done is that we wanted to look at the impact and uses of our psychometric tools for selection. We've been testing for cognitive ability and personality traits to see whether people they fit the company culture that we have and the way that we would like our especially managers to behave in the organization. And we did that from two angles: a qualitative aspect, where we asked people, so to what extent do you actually like this tool? Do you use it? And then we also looked from an assessment tool perspective, how people have actually used it. And the hypothesis here was that people that were deselected would then have kind of less of these desirable attributes than people who were hired and during the recruitment. And if we would compare to those that have been assessed after hire, then the result would be relatively the same. This is not the actual results. I can't share those, but this is kind of how we hypothesized it. And then we want to look at to what extent people that stayed in the organization, they would have higher scores than people that actually left the organization. With that said, thank you. I think I kept my time. I don't know how much there's room for questions. That's the different thing. Well, one of the questions here was that any advice of external universities for companies that you would recommend? Well, I've been working with the Copenhagen Business School, basically because I know people there, but I know there's a lot of players out there, and I don't feel comfortable in kind of recommending or not recommending specific ones here. So, is there Well, if we take this question from Sandra, the way that I interpret it is that, well, where's the expertise sitting? I mean, we primarily have a lot of the expertise sitting in HR actually. So we are kind of functionally divided, having people in HR, and then for finance we have people in finance. I don't know whether that's the best way of actually doing it. I think for smaller companies it will add a lot of sense to actually have you can say joint analytics function, so you can share some of the resources and kind of create a specific career path, or else it's going to be difficult to basically to get the FTE and attract the talent. And then we have. And do you see all your competencies has to be part of your team? Is one of the questions that came in. Well, I think the more that you have of these the competencies, the more likely you are to succeed. But I mean, it's probably unlikely that you get all of them. And in that case, I would. Then you have to work with what you have. I know that there's been some organizations that have basically started out with the change management as the first part. So they hired some business partners that were good at change management from within the company, and then they asked them to start building you can say the culture of being data driven before they actually had a lot of knowledge on how to build the data. And I think that's actually a better approach than to start hiring a data scientist and then start crunching the data, because I think a lot of the success of HR analytics actually comes with the kind of the stakeholder management and the impact, rather than whether you are able to create super fancy analytics. So often the analytics and the methods that you're using in HR analytics, they don't have to be that sophisticated in order to add value, because we're using scientific methods here, but it's not something that has to be published in high-end journals in any way, right? It just has to be directional correct here. I think those were it for the questions. Any on the comments here? Except that I messed up my sound, but I already knew that. So anyway, thanks for attending this. Sorry for the inconvenience in the beginning with the techniques and the fact that I had to speak significantly faster to catch up on those 5 minutes. So thank you for that, and then have a nice conference.